demand to keep the economy going. And I don't want to suggest history is repeating itself. I just want to suggest one thing to you, and that is that all of this fussing about the big bailout for Wall Street is in one sense appropriate, because if credit markets freeze, then we are all in trouble. Small businesses can't get the credit they need, and people can't get the borrowing for college for their kids, and people, in other words, the whole economy stops. But in the context of the story that I have just given you, understand that even when and if credit markets unfreeze, there is still an underlying big problem in terms of the capacity of Americans to continue to borrow. And businesses are not going to borrow to invest in new machinery or equipment if there are not people to buy their goods. And if there are not people to buy their goods, the economy slows. That's what's happening. So the bailout package may be necessary, but it is nowhere near sufficient. And that's something that I worry that politicians are not focusing on. In the short term, we probably are going to have extended unemployment insurance, because we are going to learn tomorrow, I expect, that for the 9th straight month in a row, the number of jobs in the United States actually shrunk. We're probably also going to need help for homeowners. There are now an estimated 6 to 7 million who are slated to lose their homes because they cannot pay their mortgages. This includes the subprime mortgage problem, but it also includes a lot of people who were fairly good credit risks a couple of years ago. They can't pay because they're losing ground. So there needs to be some help, and I had hoped in the bailout package there would be real hope for homeowners, and there's not much, I can assure you. And we also have to get serious about affordable health care. And we also have to get very, very serious about providing the means for young people to attend colleges and universities. These are all investments as opposed to national spending. One thing we don't do in this country, we don't separate spending from investing. It's all is treated the same way in the public accounts. But as you know, any family thinks that spending for example, an ocean cruise is different than spending for a kid's education. The ocean cruise, at the end of it, you owe a lot of money. At the end of spending for a kid's education, you may owe money, but that kid is going to have a higher income and be more productive. So in the terms of the national income accounts, the national spending accounts, we really ought to have an investment budget. We ought to say, okay, with regard to spending, we do match spending to revenues. But with regard to investing in health and in education and in infrastructure and basic research and development, those ought to be done even if they create wider deficits, if the public return on those investments is greater than the current expenditures for those investments. Now, what is going to happen in 4.5 weeks' time? Are we going to elect somebody who believes in everything I just said, or somebody who doesn't? Now, I promised myself that I was not going to engage in any partisan politics tonight, and I won't. But let me just say that there are two economic philosophies out there. One might be called top-down economics. It used to be called trickle-down economics, or supply-side economics. The idea simply is you cut taxes on the top, and you expect that people will have more motivation. People who are already highly motivated because they're already at the top, they will have more motivation to work hard, and they will invest in new factories and equipment and innovation, and that will all trickle down to everybody else. The other philosophy might be deemed bottom-up economics. The idea behind bottom-up economics is you invest in people. You invest in their education and their health care. You invest in infrastructure. You invest in their capacity to be productive And they are the ones that generate higher national growth. The problem with trickle-down economics is we're in a global economy right now, and it's not so much trickle-down as trickle-out, because people can invest all over the world depending upon where they get the highest return. So the real issue in terms of global capital markets is how do we, Americans, or for that matter, how does any country attract global capital? And say to global capital, come here and you'll get a high return on the investment. Well, there are really only two ways of attracting global capital. Either saying global capital come here because we're so cheap, our wages are so low, our regulations on the environment and worker safety are so negligible, the costs of doing business are so small here that you'll get a high return on your investment. The problem with that is that that doesn't build high standards of living. The only other alternative is to say to global capital, come here, not because we're so cheap, but because we're so clever and we are so productive. Come here, and our cleverness and our innovative potential and our productivity and our education, we will generate a high return for you, global capital, because we are so good. That's the only way of building high real incomes. And education and healthcare and infrastructure and basic R&D, in other words, public investments, are key to that second strategy. One candidate believes in top-down economics. The other candidate believes in bottom-up economics. But again, because I am not partisan, and I don't want to be partisan tonight, I'm not going to tell you which is which. But I am going to conclude by saying that you are all part of the answer, part of the solution. Your commitment to public service over these years is exemplary and important. And I teach here at Cal, and I teach generally because our future depends on those kids. And about 15 minutes before I came here tonight, I was talking to my granddaughter about all of this. And she didn't care anything about anything I said to her. I talked to her about Sarah Palin, and I talked about the debate, and I talked about the meltdown on Wall Street, I talked about public investment, I talked about all of this, and she just looked at me, and she could not have cared less. Now, you must understand, my granddaughter, my only grandchild so far, was born 12 hours ago. This morning from my son, who is incidentally a PhD candidate in sociology here at Cal, and his wife, who is incidentally a PhD candidate in sociology here at Cal. And they said, come on over and meet your granddaughter, who will someday be a PhD candidate. But it is because of her and because of all of your children and your grandchildren that we have got to keep on working very hard to make sure that places like Cal are available to all of them, all of our children and grandchildren, to make sure that this society continues to be the most productive, the most democratic in the world. Thank you. Would like me to take some of your questions and some